Hi, Warren. Hi, Charlie. My name's Anderson Fuller, and I'm from Avonport, Nova Scotia in Canada. And before I ask my question, I just want to thank you for all you've done to give us insight into your minds as investors. So for me, the most compelling takeaway from Berkshire is your guys' emphasis on and successful use of properly aligned incentives. In my view, owning and leading a business has two central benefits. First, you directly benefit as the company goes through your equity in it, and second, you have autonomy. Incentives for employees are a bit easier to understand, such as offering benefits, fair pay, and creating a strong culture, but I've always struggled to understand them at the highest level. Even though you say Berkshire gives its managers significant flexibility, it must be less than what they had when they were independent. Additionally, you would think passion and a willingness to sell would be inversely correlated. So how exactly does Berkshire bridge this gap and incentivize owners of its subsidiaries to give up these benefits to Berkshire? Thank you.
Well, what we really hope to find is managers who love their business but don't like a lot of what comes with it as a public company. I mean, if they have to spend a lot of time listening to people tell them what to do about this or that, and they can't afford to irritate them, or they have to go along with their trade association because, or what, whatever they may call it, because you don't want to look like a free rider, and then there's all kinds of things, compromises that people have to make in most jobs. And Charlie and I solved that problem. I had 5 bosses in my life, and I liked all 5 of them, and 2 of them were just huge factors in making my life better, but I liked all 5 of them. A couple of them were, some people here, J.C. Penney, Cooper Smith, I worked at 75 cents an hour, and I love working at Penny's. Well, I didn't love working at Penny's, but I love working for Cooper Smith, and it was 75 cents an hour. But I had to do what they told me to do, which was to sell men's shirts first, then men's clothing, then children's clothing, and so on. And I loved working for the newspaper, and I had a great manager when I was at University of Nebraska. Got to work for Ben Graham. I mean, everything worked out, but there's nothing like working for yourself. And if you can't own a big company, working at Berkshire Hathaway or running a company is the closest thing you will get. You don't have to spend time courting analysts who you probably have contempt for. In many cases, you don't have to spend time with banks, getting money, and particularly in terrible times. There's all kinds of, you get a lot in the way of freedom that I would think would be meaningful to me, and it might be better if you own the whole place yourself, but maybe you've got siblings that want out. Maybe there's a million reasons why you may not be able to achieve that unless you sell to Berkshire. And that's easier probably if you have a family business where people want to go in different directions than it is with a public company. But there's still possibilities there. So that's why I think if I owned a public company and it was worth great many billions of dollars, and Berkshire Hathaway wanted to buy it, and the shareholders were willing to vote it, I would, considering the way I would feel about life, for one thing, I wouldn't want to retire at 65. I'd want to keep working, and there are reasons to sell to Berkshire, which Charlie and I, in certain positions, if we were on the other side, would take the deal, but it isn't for everybody. Charlie?
I think we have it pretty good, Warren. We've been very lucky, and I don't know. It seems to me that most of the people who are going to end up the way we did, they almost already know how to do it.
Well, the most important purchase in retrospect that we may have made was National Indemnity, not because specifically what it did, but what it led to. And Jack Ringwald controlled the company. And I knew him and liked him, and he knew me. And once a year, he'd get irritated when the Nebraska Department of Insurance or somebody would come around, and he said they always came around when the exorbitant racetrack was open, so they could. I mean, he had all these theories about why it was a pain in the neck to be regulated, and I told Charlie Hyder, next time Jack is in that mood where he's ready to sell just because he's tired of fooling around with all these guys, be sure and find him. And so Charlie called me one day and he says, Jack is in heat. And I said, bring him over. And we made a deal. Well, that's why Jack sold. And he was happy after he made the deal. And I was happy after we made the deal. So there's a man that controlled the business, but just decided these people didn't seem to bother him as much once they were my problem and not his. And you just can't tell when lightning will strike. And that didn't do magnificent things for us initially, but just look at what it led to, and then, so you never, if you knew how you were going to shoot all 18 holes, it wouldn't be any fun playing. You wouldn't get on the first tee. I mean, it's the uncertainty, the fun of playing the game, the opponents, all kinds of things that make a game interesting. And I think Charlie and I are in the most interesting game in the world. Okay, Becky?
Here's a question from Simon Withers in Perth in Western Australia. It's been a long time since we've heard about See's Candy and NetJets. Could you please give us an update on See's performance and when you project it will run out of places to open stores in the United States? And could you also give us an overview of how NetJets has performed since its acquisition and whether it's achieved the potential you saw at the time of that acquisition?
Well, with See's, it hasn't been a question of opening stores. We found out that we have this wonderful brand that doesn't travel. The mystique, the actual product, the feelings people have about some things, as we said before. I mean, sometimes it's limited to given markets. Dr. Pepper sells at a huge rate in Dallas-Fort Worth, and maybe 10 times the percentage per capita maybe that it has in Detroit or Boston. And you say, well, how can that be when the product's been around for a century and people travel and you have national advertising? And I'm not sure, but I keep learning more as I watch different brands. And Charlie and I, our economics were so good in California that we tried to, in many cases, the same experiment over and over again. It doesn't cost much to experiment. We've tried everything in the world to cause the brand to travel, and we always think we were right for the first week, and then we find out that the magic, we can beat any other candy store pretty much, but there aren't any candy stores anymore to speak of. The world has changed. So See's is 101 years now. It has magic. And it has limited magic in sort of the adjacent West. You can almost, it's gravitational almost. And then you get to the East, and incidentally in the East, people prefer dark chocolate to milk chocolate. In the West, people prefer milk chocolate to dark. The East can sell miniatures in dark. The West, I mean, there's all kinds of crazy things in the world that consumers do, but you want to keep observing it because you do learn a little. And with Charlie and I, the temptation to keep trying things because the economics were so good if we succeeded. So we tried various things. And of course, every manager wants to try it that comes along because they've learned, that it should work, but it doesn't work. But that's what makes it very interesting. And NetJets, we we have really learned how to distinguish, and justifiably distinguish, a service to people, so that if you have to be very well-to-do to use it. But if you're very well-to-do, in effect, you're spending your heirs' money. I mean, it's what I told my Aunt Alice after she went from teaching to be worth millions and millions of dollars, and she came to see me. She'd never been married, and she said, "Can I afford to buy this for a coat in 1968 or 9?" And I said, "Alice, you aren't buying it. Your nieces and nephews are buying it because that's who you're leaving your money to." And speaking on behalf of your nieces and nephews, I'd say, we want you to buy it. And it's the same way, do your heirs want you to fly around in that jet, or do you want to leave a little more money to your foundation or to your kids? And the way to solve that one is to offer your kids a few hours themselves, and then their attitude can change. So it's in a class by itself. It's done what Ferrari has done in a different sort of way in cars. Ferrari sells 11,000 cars a year. I mean, maybe 12,000. And, they're known throughout the world. And we'll have a Chevy dealership in Austin or something. We'll sell as many cars, but we're not Ferrari. And NetJets has 600 well, counting Europe, I mean, it's maybe 650 planes. We're going to buy 100 planes this year, and we won't sell any because we've got a backlog. And we took a NetJet flight over to Tokyo, and we arrived in good shape, and we spent a couple of days there, and we flew back, and there's just nothing to it. Now, you can say, well, you're getting sort of decadent and all that in your old age, but the money will go to philanthropy, and the money will probably be $100 billion or more, and I figure the philanthropies want me to spend a few bucks on myself. All it has to do is be better than the last dollars that are spent by various philanthropies, which have plenty of problems finding things to do that make lots of sense. So, NetJets, there isn't any competitor. I mean, we looked at the other day, Wheels Up, stock came out of $10 a couple years ago. It was selling at 48 cents the other day, and they've got 12,600 people that have given $1 billion, a little over $1 billion on prepaid cards, where they've given them money and they get a certain number of hours later on, and they don't. I think there's a good chance that some people are going to be very disappointed later on. And when they have money to do NetJets, they know they'll get on the same planes with the same pilots as I and my family have flown on since before we bought the company. So it's not shaped by, the decision wasn't shaped by some commercial objective. A couple of years before, I'd never heard of NetJets, and Frank Rooney mentioned it to me, and I bought share immediately, and we bought the company, and my kids have to fly commercial sometimes, but sometimes they get to use ours too. But I've never flown anything else, and why would I? I mean, it's the gold standard, and nobody will match our fleet. I mean, if you've got 600 planes, you've got them a lot more places in the United States than anybody else will have theirs. I think we're the second largest fleet, counting the commercial airliners, and our fleet's growing, like I say, at the rate of 100 planes a year. So it's a marvelous company, and Adam Johnson has performed. You just can't believe what he's done with the business, and it was a tough model for a long time, but he's brought it where it is, and we should have a wonderful company for forever. Charlie?
Well, NetJets has been remarkable. You can argue that it's worth as much as any airline now.
Oh, it's so different. And Charlie, we had a hard time selling Charlie a NetJets membership. And then we figured the way to get him to buy a membership was to put a coach seat in the fuselage. and that really knocked him off. I mean, I think he's the only one we sold on the basis of.
I used to come to the Berkshire annual meetings on coach from Los Angeles, and it was full of rich stockholders, and they would clap when I came into the coach section. I really liked that.
But I got to tell you, we semi-corrupted him. He feels he kind of has to explain it, but he still flies at that just now. So, and it'd be crazy not to. You know, your heirs are paying for it. I mean, if you find me anybody whose estate came in at less than zero because what they spent on NetJets threw them into that position, let me know. But I've never seen a case yet. It won't be the case with the Buffett family, and it's the residual bottom beneficiary that's paying for your membership, and it's a little hard to get used to paying that much money, though, when you live like Charlie and I have most of our lives. Okay, we will go to section 11.
Hello, my name is Humphrey Liu. I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia. First, I wanted to add my thanks to you and Mr. Munger and Mr. Buffett and all of Berkshire for throwing this grand event each year. Looking at the global trends, it increasingly does seem that zero-emission vehicles may have finally reached the cusp of mass adoption. Do you see any opportunities in this space, either in specific vehicle manufacturers or in related technologies?
Well, I would say that Charlie and I for long have felt that the auto industry is just too tough. You know, the Ford Motor Company, I mean, Henry Ford looked like he owned the world with the Model T, and he brought down the price dramatically. He took up wages dramatically. He might have been, with a different personality or some different views, he might have been elected president of the United States. I mean, there's a good book that came out on that recently that told about the story of, tells a little about Nebraska in terms of it, but Henry Ford and Thomas Edison joining up, but maybe a year or two ago. If you're interested in autos, you ought to read that book. But Henry Ford did that, and 20 years later, that they were losing money, and they had a guy with a gun in his pocket, I think Harry Bennett, that was running the Ford Motor Company. It was on its way to the junk heap when the whiz kids came in, and Henry Ford II, Hank the Deuce, as they call him, brought in Tex Thornton and my friend R.J. Miller and a few people. But it's just, I was reading the other day, actually, the 1932 annual report of General Motors. And it's one of the best annual reports I've read. It's a totally honest, assessment of exactly where they were. They had 19,000 dealers then, and the population, as I mentioned earlier, was about 120 million or so. And now with 330 million people, all brands in the United States have like 18,000 dealers or something. It's just a business where you've got a lot of worldwide competitors. They're not going to go away, and it looks like there are winners at any given time, but it doesn't get you a permanent place, although, as I mentioned, I would say Ferrari is in a special place, but they only sell 11 or 12,000 cars a year. And U.S. last year, I think there were 14 million something. And it's not a business where we find it fascinating to be in. We like our dealership operation. But I don't think I can tell you what the auto industry will look like 5 or 10 years from now. I do think that you're right, that you will see a change in the vehicles, but you won't see anybody that owns the market because they changed the vehicle. Charlie?
Well, the electric vehicle is coming big time, and that's a very interesting development. At the moment, it's imposing huge capital costs and huge risks. And I don't like huge capital costs and huge risks.
And we're subsidizing it in the United States, and we're actually doing it, putting in a pro-labor. I mean, it is subject to politics like you can't believe, too. But it's going to be with us. We're not going to quit driving cars. And the American public has a love affair with them. But I think I know where Apple's going to be in 5 or 10 years, and I don't know where the car companies are going to be in 5 or 10 years. And I may be wrong, but that's Charlie and I follow the auto business with intense interest. Charlie's firm was the specialist in General Motors on the Pacific Coast Stock Exchange, and that was a franchise, wasn't it, Charlie?
Yeah, by working very hard, we could make a minor amount of money.
Yeah. It wasn't minor at the time, though. But
yeah, it was. It was pretty minor at the time, even.
Yeah. Well, that was pretty minor. Okay. Becky?
This question comes from Lindsay Peter Schumacher in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Does the current size of the Federal Reserve balance sheet concern you? In particular, the result of quantitative easing, the Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet out of nothing. The net effect, in essence, is a form of single entry accounting, creating something of value out of nothing other than a series of book entries, and wondering what Mr. Munger thinks about this as well.
Well, I don't think the Federal Reserve is the problem, and I think they can't solve the fiscal problem. I do not worry about the Federal Reserve, and I think it's fulfilling the functions for which it was established. I probably would not have been. They have two objectives, and I would not have been one probably that would have changed the inflation objective to 2% a year from 0. I think that I think that if you tell your people that you're shooting to depreciate your currency at 2% a year, that has a lot of implications, although it feels good to a lot of people. A lot of people want a little inflation, but nobody wants a lot of inflation, except somebody's got a lot of debts. And I do not worry about the Federal Reserve balance sheet. I enjoy looking at it, and the numbers are big. I always like big numbers, but it is not. It's interesting. One of the most interesting figures to me is currency in circulation. I mean, it is gone. They were saying cash is trash back in 2007 and 8, and all of that cash is going to disappear. Well, if you look at the Federal Reserve balance sheet, it's gone from $800 billion to $2.2 trillion. And most of that's in $100 bills, overwhelmingly. And if you figure it out, I think there's about 50 $100 bills per person, babies, everybody in the United States. And I would really like to know where all of that is. I mean, nobody's hoarding euro dollars, in South America or Africa or wherever. And the demand for currency now, it's some of it maybe used to be subtle drug dealers' activities and all of that. But anybody who thinks cash is trash ought to look at the Federal Reserve balance sheet, and actually you can look at how many $5 bills and $2 bills and ones and all that. And the action has been in $100 bills. I mean, it is just astounding the way that $100 bills have spread. And of course, I don't know where they are. And I don't think the Fed can know exactly, but they probably make a lot better guess than I could. But I do know it's happened, and you can watch it every week, and you'll watch currency in circulation probably grow a little bit. And believe me, cash is not trash. Charlie?
Well, I don't know where we're headed with all of this. It's been very extreme. I think that you could be pretty extreme in fighting depressions and so forth if you reverted afterwards to a period of some discipline. But if you're some discipline, but if you're going to just keep borrowing, printing money and spending it, I think eventually it causes bad trouble. And you can see it in Latin America. Latin America let its currency get out of control all the time, and of course it lagged the United States in economic achievement greatly. So I think we pay a price if we ever give up our old ways entirely and go into a new world where we just try and print money to make it easier to get through the year.
We paid a price in World War II. I mean, everybody, school kids and everybody else, myself included, I mean, we bought what were originally called war bonds and defense bonds and savings bonds and all that. But from 1942 to 1944 or 5, you paid out $18.75 and you got $25 back, and every kid saved savings stamps and all that. But when you got all through, you had 120% of GDP in the national debt instead of 30 or 40%. And we had a lot of inflation subsequently, a lot. So the people that bought those bonds in support of the war had a portion of their purchasing power taken away from them. Well, there wasn't anything wrong with that particularly, but when a country gets in the habit of doing that, I think it's tough to figure out where the breaking point is with society, but I don't think you want to come anywhere close to it.
Yeah, but it's also tough to have a mass of people unemployed. That's the tension.
Yeah. Well, that's why the Fed has two objectives in terms of employment and inflation, but they are not the ones that create the deficits. And so far, the system has worked pretty well, although, like I say, it's been...
So far, the man who jumped off a tall building is all
right
until he hits the ground.
Yeah. Well, but there could be ways we can stop now at the third floor or the sixth floor. We don't know what floor it is, but we know it isn't having hit the ground. But the question, politically, it's very, very, very tempting to vote appropriations, and it's not fun to vote taxes. And Russell Long, head of the Senate Finance Committee, they got a building named after him now. He said, don't tax you, don't tax me, tax that guy behind the tree. And basically, that is the attitude of, it's the reality of what is useful in politics. And so far, this country's managed to work very well with a lot of things that could theoretically cause a lot of problems, but it doesn't guarantee us the future on it. And being the reserve currency lets us do a lot of things, but it also creates a lot of consequences if we screw it up. Charlie?
Well, we're beating a subject to death, but it is a problem. I wish we had a solution.
Okay, with that, we'll go to station one and see if we...
Hello, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. My name's Connor. I'm an economics student at the University of Nottingham. My question for you today is during the pandemic, we witnessed supply chain shortages, especially from Asia. As a result, companies have chosen, with political tensions, to move production away. Should companies make these decisions, and should the government support them?
Charlie?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's logical if you're in business and you can make the thing in Mexico way cheaper. It's natural to open a factory in Mexico and get your parts cheaper, and a lot of the auto manufacturers have done exactly that. On the other hand, nobody wants to hollow out the whole country so all the manufacturing jobs are elsewhere and we're all living like a bunch of farmers, you know, like English colonies in 1820 or something. And these ideas are, of course, in big tension. We don't have that much foreign production. Right, Warren?
Yeah, well, but we've lost, well, originally Berkshire Hathaway is a textile manufacturer. It lost because the South became feasible versus the North, and of course then eventually.
The South got expensive compared to China.
Sure, and society benefits and some people get killed in that sort of a situation, and a rich society should take care, one way or another, and of people that worked in our shoe factories, people who worked in our textile companies. I mean, if you worked in our textile operation in 1964 when we took it over, half our workers only spoke Portuguese, and you know, they weren't getting great wages at all, but now you could do it in the South, and we were doomed to go out of business. And it wasn't the fault of the worker in any way, shape, or form. It wasn't our fault. We kept trying to compete.
Well, it was TVA had cheap power down there.
Sure.
And textile is really congealed power.
And air conditioning changed everything, because the heat in those damn places were impossible. That's a lot of things. But then it moves offshore in many ways, and net, the country is better off because of it, but it displaces a lot of people who really can't do something else in life. You can't talk about retraining somebody that's 55 or 60 and speaks only Portuguese and really tell them they're going to have a great future in New Bedford, Mass. And, you know, so you don't want to be glib about it. And we can afford to take care of those people. And we've got some systems that work reasonably well, but there's a tension between, you know, what about the person that doesn't do anything and all that kind of stuff. So these are not easy problems to solve, but I would say that by and large, we want the whole world to prosper. We do not want to be a world, we don't want the United States to be a country of extraordinary prosperity and have the rest of the world
starving.
No, it isn't going to work, and it particularly isn't going to work in a nuclear world. So, and you can have your own feelings about it as a humane person, but it doesn't. It is not. It can be done better, and we've got the resources to do it. I mean, the output of this country, well, it can be done with a lot fewer people and doing more specialized things. And of course, it has been. The work week in the United States, you know, in my lifetime has dropped dramatically, and people still feel busy, and it will be the human lot to say, you know, how can I get all these things done? But my mother didn't drive 3 kids any place. I mean, you want to go any place, if you were lucky and when you got old enough, you had a bicycle. The world just keeps looking at everything moving up as becoming sort of a base that leaves them somewhat dissatisfied. And with our prosperity, we can do a lot of things we couldn't do in 1930, and including taking care of people that get displaced by the fact that somebody else can do that work and improve their lot in life. And we got to make sure that we have the best system that takes care of the people who get displaced by that. But doing that in a political system we have and everything, we'll make a lot of mistakes along the way, but we got to keep moving in that direction. And
really interesting thing about it is that Adam Smith was right, that the free market capitalism automatically, with a lot of property in private hands and free trade and all that, automatically creates GDP per capita that grows and helps everybody, including the people at the bottom. Helps everybody a lot. But inherent in the process, there's a lot of pain in that free market capitalism. For instance, to the Portuguese workers in a textile company in New Bedford. And nobody's ever figured out how to take all the pain out of it. We do have government safety nets to take some of the pain out. And we make those safety nets a little bigger as time goes by. But apart from that, if you try and take all the pain out, you'll also take all the gains out of it. You won't have a growing GDP per capita. You'll have an economy like Russia's, which has been characterized as saying, they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work.
Yeah. Yeah, the other systems haven't worked better, but it also produces more and more disparities in wealth, and people that do nothing but get assets under management without actually performing anything extra make fortunes. And I mean, it's the job of government to keep the best aspects of capitalism while not causing people that only speak Portuguese to suffer in the process. I mean, the two aren't compatible politically over time, and we stumble along making progress on things like Social Security and all that, and we are a lot better off than we are when I was born.
Net, the United States has done a very good job of this tension between capitalistic growth and a growing social safety net. We can be pretty proud of our country looking backward.
Yeah. That may be why we have 25% of the world's GDP, starting with 0.5% of the population, and did it in a few centuries. I mean, it's a miracle. And it wasn't because we were smarter. So you got to say that there must be something to the system that's worked pretty well, even though it's produced a civil war and all kinds of things, and women, not getting a shot at anything, even after they passed the 19th Amendment. It's a work in progress. I think actually there's been progress, but it's mankind's nature to see the things wrong with it.
It's even worse. It's man's nature to take the progress as a right, not something to be earned or strived for, but something that should automatically just flow in over the transom. And that attitude is poison. It doesn't do anybody any good.
Okay, now ask us an easy question, Becky.
This question comes from Doug DeShiel. Since the accounting rules changed requiring Berkshire to report the change in fair value of its equity investments through the income statement, Mr. Buffett has repeatedly told shareholders to ignore those changes as they're not reflective of the long-term returns that those investments will produce. Recently, Mr. Buffett has argued that hold-to-maturity accounting used by the banks to avoid reflecting the changes in fair value of bank investment portfolios in the income statement and the shareholder equity account do a disservice to its various stakeholders. Can Mr. Buffett elaborate on why he views mark-to-market accounting differently for banks in comparison to Berkshire?
I believe in both cases, in doing it on the balance sheet and not in the income statement. And it's a very tough problem that the auditors face, is that obviously the income statement feeds into the balance sheet, but the balance sheet tells you whether deposits can be paid. It tells you a lot of things. And we show it on our balance sheet. We believe in showing market values on our balance sheet. We just don't believe in running it through the income account. And in getting there, we would put it in other comprehensive income like it was for a long time. So I sympathize to some extent with a far extent with the audit group, but they have to really decide whether they want the balance sheet to represent values, except it doesn't reflect them on the upside. If we buy a See's candy and it's worth way more money, so it's conservative in that sense. But or whether they want to have an income account that becomes meaningless to people, because it really changes every 5 seconds. I mean, while the market's closed today, but we have days. Well, I guess Apple was up, 7 or 8 points on Friday. I mean, that's $7 billion. I mean, that's a crazy income account. It is a reflection of where we stand at that point. And of course, if you're a bank where you're putting out money really in things that people sort of mortgages, I mean, primarily, they're a terrible instrument for a bank to own, but a great instrument for a consumer to buy and build into the whole society now in a way that was entirely different than the past. You've got to pay attention to whether they've gotten out of whack in terms of what the value of what they own and what can be demanded of them tomorrow morning. And if we had all of our money that could be demanded from us tomorrow morning, we'd have to behave a lot differently than Berkshire does. So I really think the way to do it is the way we recommend doing, which is exactly what was being done until a few years ago. I recommend the shareholders look at it that way, but we're going to follow the rules, obviously, that the SEC, state authorities and everybody require of us. But I'll still explain to the shareholders exactly what I would explain to my sister about what really counts at Berkshire. And I think every management actually has an obligation to that. And instead of it, they go in the other direction and give them a lot of figures that are total nonsense. You can't imagine some of the, EBITDA I thought was about as bad as you could get, but they kept going, and earnings before everything, EBE. And so, but that doesn't change what I would tell my sister, who's here in the audience, I hope. And I should tell all the shareholders. And we'll consistently do what is legal, and we'll consistently say what we think is right. Charlie?
Yeah.
We want owners who understand what they own. Now, that doesn't mean they have to understand the detail of it, but that's why we have people that have been around 50 or 60 years. That doesn't mean that they read the 10-Qs or anything like that, but they feel we're telling it to them like they live next door to us.
Yeah, I don't know what the accountants were thinking when they made that change. It strikes me as bonkers.
Yeah.
Absolutely bonkers. I don't see how anybody who understands how businesses really operated and should be operated by owning managers would have made that accounting change. The accountants did it just because they had a wild moment.
25 years ago, I suggested to the audit profession that the audit committee ask auditors 4 questions. And the shareholders would know a lot more about the company if those questions were asked, but it wasn't good for the auditors to be asked those questions because it might increase their liability if they answered them, and the client didn't want them to answer them because the management didn't want them to.
No, they want a system where if they follow certain rules, they're safe. And that's understandable. But I don't think they passed this rule requiring changes in marketable securities to go through the income account quarterly. They didn't do that to protect themselves from liability. They just did that for some crazy reason of their own. Yeah. You get a bunch of people who are all drawing a lot of pay out of a big complicated system and rising in it like so many officers in the Army. God knows what they'll do if you put them in a little room by themselves and tell them to invent new accounting standards.
Well, to our auditor, remember that's Charlie talking. And doesn't but I agree with him 100%. He's 99. He can get away with more than I can get away with. Okay, station 2. But what he said is enormously important. I mean, it just, you got to have some insights into what the hell really goes on. And
even if you're an accountant.
Yeah. Okay, station 2.
Dear Warren, dear Charlie, my name is Victoria Wenthrop. I am 22 years old and I study in Munich at the CDTM, the Center of Digital Technology and Management. As your grandchildren are more in my age group, let me ask you, how do you transfer your wisdom to your grandchildren and heirs? How do you lead them to investing? Do you see value in investing as a family or individually? Thank you.
I'm going to let Charlie do the answering on it. He's got more.
Well, I have more grandchildren, but I am quite philosophical about my grandchildren not thinking exactly the way I do. It seems to me that's almost the natural course of life. And I just live my life my own way, and they can observe it as an example if they want to. And if they don't, they can try some other way. I don't like it when they try some other way. And I have to pretend that I like some of the boyfriends and girlfriends I don't like. But I just struggle through like everybody else. And usually I just bite my tongue and keep silent. That's my way of handling it.
Well, I would say that I think that in my case, my 3 children have grown a lot smarter in the last 30 years, and I think I've grown smarter.
Well, I know, but you needed a lot of help.
That is for sure. No, I would totally acknowledge that. That's why I had the room to go. I mean, I had plenty of room for improvement. But
we all had a lot to grow. I worked a year for U.S. Steel, which was in their fabrication department in Los Angeles, a big operation. The thing was utterly doomed, and 3 years later, it went back to greenfields. The whole thing was razed to the ground. I did not see it coming. Now, to be that ignorant and that, as I was at that age, it was a sin. And my professors, by and large, were even more ignorant than I was. Nobody had observed the basic economics of business in a scientific way at all when I was young.
Well, if we're getting into confession time, I have to tell you, it's 3:30. So we don't want to keep going on. Who knows what we'll be saying in another half hour. So, so I thank you all very much for coming. At 4:30, we will have the shareholders meeting here, and we're continuing to sell goods for another 20 or 25 minutes. We've already broken all kinds of records, but let's really make it tough for comparisons next year. And again, I thank you for coming. Come next year, and maybe we'll figure out the answer to a few more of these questions.